Hey guys, this is Thomas over here, nursemoneytalk.com. And in this video, I'm going to talk about a little bit about nurse orientation. Specifically, I'm going to talk about just kind of like how long it is and kind of like what you can expect. But before I get into that, if you're not already subscribed, I want to go ahead and invite you to hit that subscribe button on this channel. I talk about all things related to nursing student, and of course, nurse life. Last other thing that I'll mention, and you'll kind of see me bring that up again a little bit later, is that if you are a nurse that just graduated or nursing student that just graduated, took the NCLEX, and you're about to start your career as a brand new nurse, then I would, I would encourage you to consider checking out a kind of like a course created just for new nurses to kind of help bridge the gap and help kind of ease you in there to life as a practicing nurse and kind of teach you what you need to know, kind of like stuff that nursing school doesn't really cover because they just really don't. And so check out the New Nurse Academy. You can get to it by going to nursemoneytalk.com/New Nurse Academy. I will put a link to that in the descriptions below. You'll also see it on the screen, but I know it's kind of long, so you'll definitely see it in the descriptions below. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as for how long orientation is, you're probably looking at about 2 to 6 months. But if you don't know what new nurse orientation is, let me go ahead and take a step back and let's talk real quick about what it is. So new nurse orientation is essentially when you as a new nurse will then be partnered up with an experienced nurse, a senior nurse. You know, it could be somebody who's been practicing for a really long time. Ideally, it's somebody who's been practicing for a really long time, but that's not always the case. It could be somebody, because I remember one of the preceptors I had when I was a new nurse had only been practicing, I think, for like 2 years or something like that. So sometimes it can be like not that much, they haven't been practicing that long, just kind of depending on the makeup of the unit and who's available. But the key thing is it's somebody who knows more than you, and you'll be following them as you kind of transition from this, being a student to being an actual practicing nurse. Now, this new nurse and preceptor relationship, I think, is probably going to be one of the most important relationships you'll have, as, in your career as a new nurse. Not so much, that, you'll be in contact with this person forever. Probably not so much, but in the sense that it will shape so much of how you practice. For most of you, probably for potentially your entire career. And so they're going to, on top of teaching you what's expected on the unit, they're the ones that are then going to kind of teach you what you should actually do as a nurse. We're not talking about theoretical textbook NCLEX world. No, we're talking about the real world, what actually happens. Now, like I already mentioned, this orientation typically lasts about, I want to say 2 to 6 months. I think it's probably better to say 3 months. Sometimes it can even last longer than that-ish. And the reason why I say it is because some programs will kind of almost kind of mix in there with a nurse residency and whatnot, which can extend that a little bit longer. Whereas you might actually be done having a preceptor, but you're technically still on orientation / nurse residency, for like several months after that. So it's definitely going to be one of the things where, if that's something you're curious, you'll really want to talk to, maybe not necessarily the nurse recruiter, because they probably won't know, but whoever your nurse manager will be on the actual unit you'll be working in. They're the ones that are going to have a better idea they're the ones that are going to have the idea, since it's, they're the managers for that unit, of how long it is and how long typically nurses are on orientation, because, it can vary. Even if the average unit is on, if the average nurses coming into the unit, it's like 3 months, maybe there are some people who need a couple more weeks or whatever, which, that's not a big deal. If that's what you need, there's no shame in that. You know, the goal is just for you to be a competent nurse. Now, you might then be wondering, well, what kind of dictates the length of the orientation? You know, I think it just kind of depends on how specialized it is. From my experience, probably the shortest orientation that I can think of was actually mental health. And the longest one that I'm aware of has been surgery. Now, this was an OR department that kind of did a lot of things, like essentially everything under the sun. Now, the thing with them is like they actually did something where you might have some departments do, especially if they're short staffed, which is kind of like they broke up their orientation. So, you know, they might orient, you know, I think they would orient you first for like certain surgeries, then they'll have you start working on that, and then they would then start orienting you on something else. And so you might see that, you know, just when you're going through orientation, the big thing to try to keep in mind is to just try to be flexible. Because, you know, in an ideal world, you'll be on orientation and you'll get all the help and teachings that you need. We're not in an ideal world, and this is nursing. And so, you know, at times you'll be fighting just for them to not just throw you out on your own with barely any experience. So, which I might make actually a video on that, because I think there's some sketchy stuff that can honestly sometimes happen during nurse orientations. But couple of things I do want to throw out there that I think that will help you on you know, an orientation, a new nurse orientation, is one, consider getting a new grad course, kind of like that I mentioned, the one I mentioned earlier, nursemoneytalk.com/new nurse academy. The link will be in the descriptions below. And I think courses like that can really help kind of bridge the gap of what nursing school taught versus like real life, and kind of like how to handle certain things that nursing school just doesn't really cover, primarily just because they don't really test you really on that. So for instance, one thing I can think of would be maybe like videos on how to do good IVs, or, you know, how should you actually chart and what you should actually document, you know, for the practical sense, for the attorneys even. And so that's actually, these are the things that are in the course that I mentioned. So definitely check that out. The other thing that I do think that is definitely important to note is that to make sure to ask a lot of questions. This is your time to really like get comfortable with being a nurse. So definitely ask questions if you have it. Last thing I will mention on this is that I think it is very important that during the orientation time that you learn where your hospital policy is located in your facilities like intranet. How do you find that policy? I am not saying you even need to remember all of those policies. I think, you know, obviously there's going to be some, especially ones that you deal with on your unit on a regular basis, that'll be more second nature, that you'll obviously be aware of it. Some of it will just be like stinking common sense. But for the other ones that are not as, you know, common sense or black and white or whatever, as you'll need to know where it's at, because you would be shocked how many times, like, you know, a physician will come in, they'll tell you like, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and be like, that, I don't think that's policy. They'll say, well, it is policy. And you'll look at it as like, no, it's not. And you, as the nurse, would have gotten in trouble if you followed that. Now, it might not be necessarily a physician. It could be other nurses or older nurses who are set in their ways that are just wrong. And so, you know, you'll want to be up to date with what those policies are, but especially know how to find your facility's policies and guidelines for stuff like that. But that is all I've got for this. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you very soon in that next one.